No.
It should be interesting. And just sit here and say, okay, you want to borrow a crash?
Well, that's just how
I'm taking it off.
it's switch, you know what I mean?
Because you know what?
Can't win now. Going this way.
All right, good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so I think we'll get started promptly. So thank you all for coming out this evening. I know it's a little cool today, a little blustery out there, so thanks for making the effort and time to come out this evening. So this is a public information meeting related to Spectacle Lake and the consideration of the Lakeside Zone for that lake. And so there's up on the screen, we have the agenda for this evening. So kind of welcome and opening remarks that we'll do right now, and then we'll have a brief presentation by our planner, and he'll do an overview of the kind of situation and the new zone and some of those considerations, and some of the pieces where we're looking for input from the public, and then turn it back over to myself, and then we'll have time for public comments and questions from all of you, and then we'll wrap up the evening. So a pretty straightforward agenda. We don't plan to keep you here a long time, but we will stay as long as we need to. So as long as you have comments to make, we'll stay and listen. So that's how our meeting is going to run. So unless anybody has any questions, and the only one other thing that I will mention is that we are recording the meeting this evening. So we know that there is another meeting happening tonight, so we typically don't record these meetings, but just because the meeting that the village is putting on related to the fire hall is also happening tonight, so we wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to listen to this presentation and then follow up with comments into the office, either by call or email or stopping by the office. So we will be recording the meeting this evening, and it will be uploaded probably by tomorrow sometime. It will be available on YouTube. So if you're speaking with anybody that couldn't make it, you can kind of send them in that direction. Okay, so having said that, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Great, yeah, thanks Chad, and welcome everyone. So I'll just go through a few slides here to kind of set the stage for what's happened recently, where we are now, and then, like Chad said, the decisions going forward, and where we're looking for standpoint. So just as a quick bit of background, this meeting is following the decision of council basically in October, which was made to remove the protected watershed zone around Spectacle Lake. On the image here, the protected watershed zone, as you can see, was the hashed area, so it went around the lake. Basically, the southern end is about as small as about 100 meters from the lake, and then obviously north up past, well past the 103, and that was intended to roughly reflect the drainage basin or the watershed area of the lake. So as a result of council deciding to remove the protected watershed zone, what's in place as of today is the mixed use zone, which is the same zoning that would surround that protected watershed zone shape that you see there. Mixed use zone is one of our less restrictive zones. As it implies, it allows a wide range of uses, commercial, light industrial, and a variety of different housing and residential options. So that's what's in place today. But part of the reason that council, I believe, opted for the mixed use zone was that at the time when they got to public hearing to remove the protected watershed zone, that was the only option that they had available to them based on sort of procedure. I won't get into all the nitty gritty. But they recognized that the mixed use zone may not be the right level of protection. There was a lot of discussion about a compromise between the protected watershed zone, which allowed virtually no development, and the mixed use zone, which allows a wide range of all kinds of development. And so at that time, council made it known that they wanted to consider the Lakeside Zone, which I'll get into in more detail, sort of what exactly that means tonight. But that's what we're here to talk about now, is should the Lakeside Zone be applied around Spectacle Lake? And then as we get into it here later, you'll see we're looking for input on the, I'll use two terms, the extent or the depth of the zone. And basically the zone will start at the high water mark and it'll go outwards. So if I say 100 meters from the edge of the lake, it's going all the way around the lake 100 meters. And I have some maps later to show some of those. So I may have kind of blend into this slide a little bit in our current situation. So we're now considering applying the Lakeside Zone. In general, and then we'll go into the specifics, the Lakeside Zone allows for what we'd say low density residential development. So 2 dwelling units per lot, and each lot has to be a minimum of an acre or 0.4 hectares in size. So that's fairly low level, low density. When we talk about, compared to say around the village here, where you might have an 8,000 square foot lot, and you could have 2 units on each of those, so much more dense. Another thing to note is that if the Lakeside Zone does go into effect, this would be in addition to some underlying protections that all lakes in the municipality have, and I have a slide on that. So this next slide doesn't show a lot. This kind of just shows where we're at now. This is basically the entire municipality. This is Spectacle Lake, if you can see my cursor right under, I'm not sure if the cursor's showing up, right under the MU, right here, that's Spectacle Lake. So the Protected Watershed Zone, like we saw on the other map, used to go way up basically to that GB and then all the way down. This is what it looks like today with the mixed use zoning, so the Protected Watershed is gone. So I just wanted to have an understanding of that. And if you look at the bottom here, this is Sherbrooke Lake. And this is the only other area where the Lakeside Zone that we're talking about for Spectacle Lake is actually in effect. So this blue band that you see going around Sherbrooke Lake, that represents 300 meters measured from the water's edge inland where that zone applies. So when we start talking about depths and things like that, that will give you the only context I can give you, because that's the only lake where it's been put in place so far. So to get into the details of the Lakeside Zone, and I realize the text is probably going to be small, so I will read out some of the highlighted sections here. So this is these are pages right out of our municipal land use bylaw, which is the document that says in this zone, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. So as mentioned here, under residential, like I said, it's 1 to 2 dwelling units per lot. And again, that lot would have to be 1 acre in area. Prohibited uses and developments in the Lakeside Zone, so all light and heavy industrial uses. So light industrial could be something like warehousing, heavy industrial might be manufacturing or other uses that tend to be quite noxious and something you wouldn't want around homes. Just for context, all heavy industry is really only allowed at Kaiser Medical. That's the only place in the municipality where heavy industry is allowed. But in the Lakeside Zone, no industrial uses at all. Similarly, no commercial uses. The only exception to that commercial uses is that home-based businesses are permitted. So that would be like, for example, if you had a small office in your home and you were offered professional services from that office, or you maybe had to cut hair out of your home. So there's limitations to how large that can be. But any dedicated commercial uses are not allowed either. So this would theoretically prevent campgrounds, for example. You wouldn't be able to somebody wouldn't be able to open a campground in this zone because that would be a commercial use. A couple of other points, I guess, on the zone in terms of this is some of the things that makes this zone quite unique from other zones that we have. There is a requirement to maintain a vegetative buffer, and what we mean by that is the first 10 meters from the water's edge inland. There are requirements to leave the natural vegetation in place. There are, and if you read all of this text here, it goes into the specifics, but there are allowances to clear pathways and openings to access the water, but there's limitations to how wide those can be, and an overall, we look at the overall, 10 meters in by your property width, and then in that area, basically 70% has to be left undisturbed. So it's trying to find a balance between letting you put a pathway in, put a dock in at the lake, but the intent is that there's a significant amount of vegetation there, and that will slow down water runoff, and it will help absorb any pollutants or nutrients from getting into the lake. So those are some of the highlights on the Lakeside Zone, and we can certainly come back to this if there's other questions there. As I mentioned earlier, the Lakeside Zone, if it goes ahead, would be in addition to some existing protections that apply to all lakes in the municipality. The primary one is called the lakefront overlay. And the terms get a little confusing, but the lakefront overlay is essentially a 20-meter or 66-foot setback. And the setback means you basically can't build within it. So within 20 meters of the lake, your house or cottage would have to be set back at least that far. That's in place today. That was in place under the Protected Watershed Zone. It's in place today under mixed use, and it will be in place going forward under the Lakeside Zone. So, and as you can see on this map, this is just a few, but the red band indicates that 20-meter buffer, so Spectacle Lake here, but like I said, this applies to every lake in the municipality, so that 20-meter setback goes across the board. But in those other areas, they wouldn't have the same limitations on the number of dwelling units or on keeping the vegetation at the water's edge. So those are some of the things of the Lakeside Zone where it goes above and beyond and offers more protections for the lake, basically. Looking at the municipal planning strategy for the Lakeside Zone, which is, the planning strategy is sort of the policy document. It sets out the goal and objectives for all of these zones. As you can see highlighted here, hopefully, the primary purpose of the Lakeside Zone is to protect water quality, but similarly, it is also intended to enable low-density residential development on lands that surround lakes while protecting the riparian environment, essentially the water's edge and the vegetation around it. This again is a policy that comes from the municipal planning strategy. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially what it says is when council is considering putting the Lakeside Zone in place, there are a few things that they should be looking at in order to determine how far or how deep back from the water's edge it will go. As I mentioned in Sherbrooke Lake, it ended up being 300 meters, that's what we determined there. But basically here at the end of this paragraph, you can see, so it should be based on criteria such as local context, lot size, proximity to public roads, and lakeside community character. I would also add in things like slope or steep slopes, that kind of thing, because that obviously affects how water is running off and draining. So when we looked at Sherbrooke Lake, in that case, one of the things that we ended up leaning heavily on there was the existing lot configuration. There were a number of pretty dense subdivisions that have been done on Sherbrooke Lake, and so in that case, the main deciding factor was we don't want to have somebody at the front of the subdivision subject to these rules, but then 3 houses back have a whole different set of rules. It didn't make a lot of sense. So in that case, 300 meters picked up most of the existing cottages and settlement around the lake, and that makes sense. When we looked at, for example, the hills and the slopes in Sherbrooke Lake, the ridge line for where it drained into the lake was like almost 2 kilometers back, so it was way too far. So it's going to be different for each lake, and it's a combination of looking at all of those criteria to come up with what we feel is a best fit. So the next couple of slides I have will hopefully help to start to outline that. I don't know, does it show up a little? So the map on the left is essentially a slope map. So the darker the red, the steeper the slopes, and the lighter, getting closer to white, the more flat the land is there. You can also see there we obviously have three bands in purple showing a 100, 300, and 500 meter distance from the lake. Those are not the only 3 options. That's just to kind of provide some context. So we could go 150, we could go 50, we could go 1,000. So those don't mean anything. They're just to provide a little bit of context. On the right, similar, we're kind of looking at the same data here, but on the right, this is a map showing contour lines. So the closer those lines get together, the steeper the slope, and the further they are apart, the more flat it is. So when I look at these, there's a few things that become fairly apparent. There are definitely some steep slopes on certain parts of the lake, and I think the 300 meter band captures the majority of those, certainly not all of them. Some of the other criteria that we were looking at was public roads. In this case, there aren't any public roads within the area that we're looking at. Except if you look at the 500 meter band, that actually just starts down to touch on the Chester Downs subdivision. So there's several houses that would actually be in the Lakeside Zone on Chester Downs Road if we selected the 500 meter option. Next slide is just a couple of different images showing the same kind of thing here. So on the left, this is an aerial photograph with those same 100, 300, and 500 over top. The green, obviously, is the old Protected Watershed Zone, just for reference there. And then on the right, it's really just different shades showing different extents. So again, you can, and I know it's a little tricky to see, but you can see here at the 500 meter, these are existing homes that would be picked up. Duncan Road and Green Hollow, which again are not public roads, but you can see where those kind of fit in. So Duncan fits within the 300-meter band. So as staff, we haven't come up with a recommendation yet, but those are just some of the things that kind of popped out to me when I was looking at this, and some of the things that I think are worthy of consideration. So as this goes forward, this again, like I said, council will need to determine what extent or what depth the zone will be applied at. And so that is one of the pieces that we'd love to have input from the public on. If you have, if particular distances make sense or don't make sense, or where there's other criteria that we're not, thinking of or taking into account, that would be great to know. In terms of where we are in the process, this one is a little bit different than norm because of, like I said at the beginning, we started with a rezoning process that got us part of the way, and this is kind of part two. So because of that, as you can see here in green, application in this case came from council. It was referred to the Planning Advisory Committee. Now in this case, the original application to rezone around Spectacle Lake went to the Planning Advisory Committee, and they recommended in favor of the Lakeside Zone, and council then originally wanted to go a different direction and then essentially changed their minds. So because of that, this file, we already essentially have a recommendation from PAC. They're in favor of the Lakeside Zone, and in their view, the 300-meter depth made sense. So we basically already got that. So council directed us when they were doing sort of this part two of the rezoning to do this public information meeting tonight, which you'll see in orange. And then from there, it will then go to back to council for consideration, and they can give first reading and then set a date for a public hearing. And the public hearing is the final meeting in the process. Just like this, it's open to the public, and except all of council would be there. Everyone would have an opportunity to speak if they wanted to, and then after that, council would vote to either approve the rezoning or reject the rezoning. So yeah, so we're still early in the process. We expect there was when council did the initial rezoning to mixed use, they did recognize that the mixed use zone allows, like I said, allows for a variety of different developments that the Lakeside Zone would not. And so essentially you could think of it as a gap in the regulations from when the Protected Watershed Zone was removed to whenever the Lakeside Zone is in place. So we're in that gap now where theoretically a development could be proposed in the mixed use zone that may not be desirable. Because of that, when they gave us that direction to come back with part two, council said to do that within 2 months. They wanted the report back on their table within 2 months. And that is essentially the end of November. So that was another reason for having this meeting this week, was we needed to have this before the staff report goes to council, because we need to put the input, collect the input from you folks and reflect that back in the staff report. So as far as we know, there will be a report going next Thursday, the 21st, to council. They'll consider that for first reading, and if they are satisfied with it, then they'll set a date for a public hearing. Anyone who got any property owners that are proposed to be rezoned will get another letter with the date of the public hearing. And obviously are welcome to come or put in comments in advance for that. So that is the end of the slides. I'd be happy to go back to any of them if it's helpful for questions or discussion. Yeah.
So I guess just before we get into kind of public comments or feedback, is there any questions on what's presented or anything not clear or any follow-up questions?
Do you have a map, a chart that shows the property that's owned by the municipality?
Yes, I can, if you bear with me, maybe we'll move on and I can pull it up. It'll just take me a moment.
Okay, because that sort of shows, I mean, obviously we have a lot of different points of, or different vested interests here. I'm a village resident, and my concern is that we don't close any doors with respect to a portfolio of water strategies over the long term.
Okay.
And, you know, this may be one, and so the Lakeside Protection Zone helps protect the quality of water, the environment, but that combined with property owned by the municipality, which would create access or place for some sort of, you know, water
Absolutely.
supply access. So I think, you know, some of us are just trying to ensure that we don't close doors.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think council recognize that, and so there's no intent for the municipality to divest itself of those properties at this point in time. That would be, that's not on the table right now for that to
But it would be
happen.
great to have a map somewhere in the package that really highlights those.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So there are several properties, so we'll get a map up here. There's several on either end of the lake, so so we'll bring those up. So did you find them already?
You know, there's,
Let's try.
every level of government, I own properties in multiple municipalities, including in this area. The federal government, the provincial government, is fighting every day with municipalities all across this country because of restrictions that the municipalities are putting in on people's property. People are moving from the areas, they got no place to build there because restrictions, the land is not available. Now, if a developer or a person who owns a piece of property in this area or any other municipality wants to build, they can't build because municipalities, they can't even get approval to build a home. So the taxes are going up every year on these properties, and there's more and more restrictions put onto them. You know, so
Yeah, so
that's the bottom line, right? You know, when you look at the big scheme here, I don't know why, personally, why they're putting any restrictions on any of this property here or trying to change. There must be an agenda. I don't know what it is, obviously at this point. But, you know, I want the people to realize that, you know, there are existing businesses there now that are working in that area and want to work in that area, want to build in that area. You know, if you want to build a new fire department or whatever, right, you know, there in that area, that's a beautiful area to, you know, if somebody wants to sell their property and develop. You know, so council has to be prepared here, you know, to realize that, you know, when they start putting policies in place here, you know, that won't embrace our children to stay in this area because they can't find a place to build here because there's red tape, right? And that's what it is, right?
I really appreciate your comments, and so just one of the things that I'll say is that this is not a decision that the council takes lightly to make these kind of changes, and so it is a balancing, and they're trying to find a balance in there, just where Spectre Lake had been identified as a potential water supply in the past, and so it's the balance of trying to protect the lake, protect the quality of the lake for what potentially could be in the future, with at the same time trying to respect property owners' rights. So just before.
Follow up, I want to say one more thing, you mentioned water. Is it correct that the water is not suitable for water for Chester in the future? The water doesn't meet the standard that.
The actual quality of the water?
It's been determined unlikely to ever be a suitable water source.
So that's my.
That's by Public Works, or it's your guys' people.
Yeah, so there's lots of different layers to that. So the actual quality of the water, so we have not been, in recent years, we haven't been testing the actual water quality. So some of what's being referred to is not necessarily related to the quality of the water, it's lots of other factors such as quantity of the water and those types of things, so.
And I heard that there was not enough, I was informed that there was not enough water anyway, even if they tried that.
No,
And
it
what
would
would
only
be
be
the
able to
cost?
feed 2,000, or I guess quench 2,000 people, not 2,000 homes.
So I'm just gonna interrupt just for 1 second, because I just wanted to make a just initial statement just before we go any further. So we're into our public input part of our evening. And so we definitely want to hear from everybody, and your comments are all valued, and so we do want to hear from everybody. And we do know that People have different opinions on the topic that we're talking about this evening, and people sitting right next to you may have a different opinion than you do, and that's okay, and we do want to hear from everybody. So we would ask that everybody be respectful of everybody's comments, and all the comments that are received this evening will be going through to council, so there's no decision being made here this evening. And so Gareth had mentioned about the report that's going to council, so kind of summary of kind of what we hear tonight will be going as part of that report back to council for their decision. And obviously, as Gareth had mentioned before, that there will be absolutely future opportunity through the council meeting or public hearing for folks to share additional thoughts on this matter. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. And so what we'll be doing for kind of process is that if you want to speak, we'll just ask you to raise your hand, and I'll try to remember the order that hands go up. And so we just ask that one person speak at a time, and we'll hopefully get through to everybody. And so we'll definitely record all comments, and we'll obviously attempt between Gareth and I to answer questions kind of as best we can as we go through the evening.
Susan, you probably picked up on it, but so it's the orange properties.
It's great to see.
Yes, yeah, so the properties identified in orange are ones that are currently owned by the municipality. Okay, who'd like to speak next? Questions or comments?
Any,
I guess, so one of the things that we're really interested in, that if the Lakeside Zone does proceed, we're interested in people's thoughts on the appropriate distance. So that's map that Gareth had put up there previously around the 100, 300, 500 meter. We're interested in people's thoughts on this. Yeah.
As a landowner, all I'm gonna put in as a recommendation is we be good with like 100 meters.
Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, okay, no, that's
I second that too.
Third it.
Yeah, wherever there.
Why are they looking at 500 meters? Because the watershed before wasn't even
It
500.
was just an option.
So, yeah,
Well,
so
It was, he was just showing you.
so it actually,
Or even
so
300 meters.
So you're correct, so on the southern end of the lake, the 500 meters does extend a long distance away. So the way that we've drawn this is just a bubble, so it's just lines on a map showing those distances.
Yeah.
You can tell that the 500 meters does not go anywhere close to where it was in the northern end, but in the southern end it does, so.
so it's just food for thought.
Yes,
Like,
it's just-
if
yeah.
75 meters was the consensus, we'd take that and say.
But even 300 is more than what the watershed was before, wasn't it?
Only on the southern end.
Just
Yeah.
on this lower end, so you can
Right.
see where that darker shading underneath, so it would have been in that area, so the 300 just kind of catches the end of it. Or the 100, so the 300 is beyond that, and then the 500, of course.
So on your topographical map, it's not completely symmetric, right, around the lake. So is maybe the better solution to not have a blanket distance, but rather to tailor it a bit?
That's a possibility, yeah. Again, we'd be looking for input as to what that should look like, or the criteria for.
So what you're
One
suggesting,
side versus-
yeah, so what you're suggesting is similar to the old watershed zone where it was, yeah, so
Like, well,
it was.
you're concerned, for example, about steepness of areas that
Right.
could impact runoff, et cetera. So
Right.
maybe those areas, it skews, deeper,
So it could be
150
shallower
to
on
300.
on the lower end and deeper on the upper end.
Possibility.
And maybe to get at that, maybe this has to be a bit more granular, looking at, actual sort of property layout relative to topography.
Yeah, if we tie it completely to topography, we're gonna end up with something like we did.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
That's
that, what you're doing there is a measurement from the high water mark, the whole way around the lake, that's what you're
Yes,
looking at.
yeah, that's right,
It's got
yeah.
nothing to do with
But,
graphical maps.
but I mean, there would, theoretically, like, we could entertain an option if this is what the consensus was like on the south end to match the old protected watershed line, and then on the north end to go to 500 meters, because it went, if it was to follow here and then go further up here, like those things would all be theoretically possible. It's just the only example we have of this was the Sherbrooke Lake, and that was 300 meters across the board, but that doesn't mean that it's how it has to be.
Isn't Sherbrooke Lake, that's not all the way around the lake, correct?
Just on our side, on
I don't
the,
understand that, how one side can be protected, one side not.
It's all because of the municipal boundary.
Yeah,
The municipal
two different
boundary runs
councils.
right up
Yeah.
the middle.
Oh.
Municipal
Oh,
municipal
okay,
boundary
now I
runs right up the
understand.
middle of the lake, so that.
And it was the landowner's decision as well.
that's right, yes, there's
Right.
a lot of support up there from the
Not like
landowners.
this one.
And what we hear is that the other side is advocating now to the District of Lunenburg for similar protections, it's just hasn't been put in place yet.
I didn't understand that
So
before.
when you guys had mentioned before that you would bring the landowners together and discuss like their wants, is that something that you're still gonna do?
Well, that's-
This is it.
This
That's
is.
it, okay.
And just, I know we mentioned it earlier, but just, for any folks that you're talking to, whether landowners or other folks, that have an opinion, that weren't able to make it out tonight, I mentioned it earlier, but, by all means, they can, you can, call and speak to Eric, or send us an email, or
Perfect.
send a letter, and we'd be happy to accept,
Okay,
all those
awesome.
comments as well, outside of this.
Yeah. And as far as, like you said, as far as we know, next Thursday, it should be on the council agenda, so that.
And yeah, we have had several property owners that have stopped by to talk to us and share their thoughts and opinions as well, so some of that has
Yeah.
happened before this meeting as well.
And meetings are in the evening now for councils.
That's a good point, yes. For those of you who are used to the Thursday morning councils, council meetings are now at 6 o'clock Thursday night, so yes.
Way better.
Yeah, let's say 300 meters, that protects the life.
Yeah.
I mean, I was back in 1970, and no, it wasn't in the watershed area when I went there. They never started in 1987 or 86. So I went through a lot. Like a lot of people talking to me, don't even what they're talking about, it never was there when I was there.
That's their
Probably wasn't even born.
So 300 meters is
Yeah.
what you're suggesting? Okay, thank you.
So I find this a little bit confusing just because there's so many different angles and people interested. But so the further you go back with the Lakeside Zone, does that protect the lake more? Like if you do 500, like what I feel like is if we knew if that was a source of water, drinking water, it would be so much easier to make this decision. I don't think people would care so much, the people that don't live around the properties there. Probably wouldn't care as much if it's 100, 300, 500, if it was definite that this cannot be used as a water source. So are you guys planning to determine that at any point?
I don't think that's planned, and I mean, that was the last time that, when we removed the protected watershed zone, that was the crux of the issue. Our public works staff were reviewing all the documentation and engineering reports that we've had over the years and saying that it's not a viable source, not based on quality, but based on quantity, recharge, potential for green algae, shallowness of the lake, all those kind of things.
Cost
Pardon?
and cost.
Right, yeah, there clearly was a disagreement amongst a percentage of the members of the public that disagreed with that analysis from our public works department. So are we planning to relitigate that? No. Are we planning to test the water? Not that I'm aware of. As far as I'm aware, there's no plans for Spectacle Lake in terms of being a water source.
Okay,
As far as
I
I
didn't
know.
understand that at all.
So it's looking at like alternatives?
Yeah, council is currently, or council has directed Public Works, and they're currently looking in the Marriott's Cove, Robinson's Corner area for groundwater, because that has been, again, according to our professionals, that is the best potential source of a municipal water. Surface water was something that was used in the past, but it tends to have a lot of issues these days.
Right.
Yeah, so that's as far as I'm aware, is the planner, which is not everything, that is the current direction to pursue the water sources through groundwater. Yeah. So disagreements with that direction would be best directed to council, because that's not something that we deal with in community development. Those are council decisions and typically go from council to public works. And then if there was ever a water system as the planner, that would certainly influence my work, but it's not something that I'm directly involved with creating.
Right. Can I just say a concern, I'm a skeptic and I kind of overthink things sometimes, but if I was a developer and I knew that there was a water source that could serve a certain number of people around the lake, it seems that maybe that lake could be used as a water source for a certain number of people around that lake, right? So if you develop around the lake and then you have the water source, then that water source could be used for the development around the lake. Has that been talked about?
Just dig
Not that I'm
well,
aware of.
Drill a well, yeah.
Okay.
join out.
There's no municipal water in Chester anywhere, like in the.
Right, but I'm saying if you're opening up 1,100 acres, you have a lake right there, it seems only logical to say, wow, we have an amazing water source right here, let's use that for the properties that we're gonna develop around the lake.
Might be
Nobody's
something,
talked about that?
It's not the,
not that I'm aware of. Yeah. You could raise that with your District 7 councillor,
Yeah.
or any of the other councillors.
Okay, cool.
To clarify, what ideas or what are you guys looking at, how you're gonna make your decision on the setback of how large,
Yeah, so.
how far back it's
So we've
going?
we've heard a couple suggestions tonight, 300 meters and 100 meters from a couple of property owners. I mean, to be frank, I haven't like completed my analysis yet, which is thinking it through, and it's including this. I think it's, and ultimately it would be up to council. What I'm gonna try to do is to put together a few options for them. The options we heard tonight will definitely be on the table, maybe there'll be a couple other, like, do you wanna do 100 at the southern end and 300 at the northern end, or something like that, like, can't say, like, haven't quite gotten there yet. What I can say, and this was honestly true coming into this meeting, not just from what I've heard, I personally don't feel that anything beyond 300 meters is necessary in this case, based on the slope maps and the existing development patterns. Like again, Duncan Road is completely within that 300 meter, and you can see, there's been clearing and stuff up there. So to me, that makes sense as a sort of an outer boundary to look at. So I think the recommendations will be somewhere between 100 and 300 meters is, I guess, where I'm.
but you can still build within that 100 meters.
Yeah, it's not a setback,
Yes.
that's right, yeah,
Just to clarify.
yeah,
It's just what
Yeah,
you can do.
anywhere is in there, it doesn't matter if it's 100 or 300.
that's right, you can build within it. The
Right.
only true setback is
Mhm.
that 66
60.
feet from the lake.
Which is
Right.
fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Very fair.
Like it is everywhere.
yeah, that's across the board, that's right, yeah.
So then how would you characterize the most important benefit of the 300 meter setback versus the
No
100?
industrial.
Yeah, so, and the question was asked further, but like if it goes back further, does that offer more protection to the lake? It probably, to an extent, it probably does. There's probably an element of like diminishing returns, like, at 100 versus 300 might be a distance, but then at 2 kilometers versus 6 kilometers is, at some point it will lessen, but, the further back it goes, it limits the total number of dwellings within that band, and therefore the total number of septic systems within that band, and the total number, we don't control how people use their land. Like, there are some, we don't have rules on pesticides, so if the people that are right up against the lake wanna start using pesticide, that's gonna be a lot worse than having a few more people further back. So there's always that, element of, we can only control what we control.
And what did you say, Garth, again, sorry, minimum lot size was for
An
an acre?
Yeah,
And on that acre was a maximum of 2 dwellings.
2 dwellings.
So you could technically subdivide and have a half acre lot, but it would only be allowed to have 1 dwelling on it?
No, it doesn't, I know that seems logical, but it doesn't actually.
Okay, so they have to be 1
They
acre?
have to be 1 acre, and if you can
Okay,
do 1 unit or 2 units, whichever
Okay.
you choose, yeah. So I don't think I quite answered your question
No,
directly.
I mean, but what you're saying is it's still under any scenario, low density development.
Right.
But to the benefit of even property owners, there's the greater potential of protecting water quality with a 300 meter versus a 100 meter.
That's true, and it also offers the assurance that even if it's not something that we're worried about water quality, that just in terms of, a use that people would find, offensive or noisy or whatever you have, I mean, the fact that within that zone, you're only allowed to build homes clearly offers some protections there too, yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Because I just want to ask about the lake. So you guys had spoken about that provincially assigned protected water or something like where you could lobby the
Oh,
province to do like some kind of an actual protected.
If, yeah, for
Is
things
that-
that are actually water sources, you can register those with the
Right.
province, yeah. And that provides what's called activities regulations, so things like motorboats and
Oh, okay.
swimming and fishing and all kinds of things that we have no authority to control normally, the province can implement that.
Because I thought they talked about that at that meeting. Like I had the impression it was kind of like the lake would be protected on some level. I thought even as a drinking water source, I obviously got that wrong, but as even a source for recreation or something. So does this Lakeside Zone allow for that?
Yeah, so the Lakeside Zone doesn't limit people from using the lake like to boat or to swim.
Right.
That's none of our land use bylaws.
No, I know.
Development and develop.
But I mean,
okay.
people living there, building, and obviously things going into the water, all that stuff, that's not a problem for like using recreational,
Yeah,
like
no.
swimming in the lake
No.
or, okay.
So yeah, you're right, that the designation, that is something that you would seek from the province, that's never been done. The point that was being made at council was that has never been done here. All that was done was there was a zone put in case it ever would be to that point that we would want to have it registered, and it never got to that point.
Right.
I arrived late, what's the purpose of the water, of having the dip zone? To protect the water, is that the only objective?
No, it is sort of multi-purpose. So this comes under the municipal planning strategy, which really explains the purpose and the reasoning for the different zones. So you'll see all those bullet points would be valid. I highlighted two there so the primary purpose is around water quality, but it is also intended to allow development in the area. For the commercial and industrial uses, safeguard character. What we mean by character there is the development pattern or the way that it's been used. So when Sherbrooke Lake asked for this, in their case, it was kind of like maybe what you call a cottage country, that kind of thing. It was primarily recreational cabins. There are some year-round homes too. So different character to different types of developments. If you have a bunch of cottages and small little subdivisions, that might be different than larger estate homes or something like that.
I think when you were answering this lady's question, excuse me, you mentioned people using herbicides or pesticides, that people could just start doing that, is that?
What I intended by that comment was that we don't have any regulations preventing that. That's not to say I'm encouraging it, that's just to say that this doesn't cover anything like that.
On a related note, so we have done some work previously at Fox Point Lake and at Sherbrooke Lake around some water quality monitoring on those two lakes, and one of the elements of doing that was an educational component. So we tried to through some newsletters and information that we sent out is that to send information out, especially to property owners that own lakefront, is to help provide information to them to be thinking about the quality of the water of the lake. And so things like applying pesticides or making sure that your septic system is functioning properly and all those types of things are really important things. But as Garth noted, so we don't have direct control. We can't control what people do on their properties. And if somebody wants to plant a lawn and heavily fertilize that lawn really close to the edge of the lake, we don't have control over that.
That'd be provincial, I assume?
I think we could have, the municipality likely could do a pesticide bylaw as a standalone bylaw.
Yeah.
Who's gonna police that?
Place right now.
But yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's tough, yeah.
I mean, I would say most of us wouldn't want that for our
No.
land around our
Right.
lake. Like, I don't wanna pollute our lake, I don't want, we're not going down that road, like, we just wanna use our land.
So in understanding that, thank you, that was, and seeing what the aims are, the policy goals, what exists there is more than just a potential water source, in my opinion, as a landowner. I think it's a special place. It's not been developed, and there is some heavy uses there. But the fact that at night it's pitch black and dark has a benefit, I assume, to certain animals and whatnot. To have a policy goal for this decision that included more than just water quality, but protecting the wild space that has been allowed to grow and exist there would be a good one. And I think that adds value as a property owner there to our value.
Are you gonna move your place back from the lake?
That's not what I'm getting at, but had the municipality
You're right on top of it.
thought bigger, I would have considered relocating, actually. And the municipality could have offered me, my family, places to go. I think this is an opportunity to create a world-class residential where people are living there. Everyone who owns land there gets to develop, but where the rules protect it as a dark, wild space, and there are rules to protect the water quality. I think there should be herbicide. I don't think we should be able to put that stuff on our land in that zone. And I'm guilty because my dad's lawn is all of a sudden awesome, and that's because I put Scott's turf builder on it. But if I'm not supposed to be doing that because that's endangering things, I would be willing to accept that restriction.
So yeah, it's a little outside of the scope of this. Again, requests like that, I would suggest probably to your counselor or directly to council. They could direct staff to look into those kinds of things. A pesticide bylaw would be not through the land use bylaw. I believe that would be like a separate standalone bylaw. But I think it is possible. I believe HRM and a few other municipalities have it. But all the details, like we talked about, how we can enforce it and how, and penalties and levels. It's beyond that, but
Not a bad idea though.
so yeah, so that's possible, but in the scope of what's being considered here, which is a rezoning, adding new policies is not within the scope of that.
I'm not a politician, and I'm not used to these in-depth, things, public meetings, etc. But it seems that we're here to protect the water quality, and the fact that people can do that would undermine everything we do, and it just seems it's all kind of pointless. And
I suppose that's one way to look at it. The other way is like we're doing what we have the ability to do, and if everybody does that, you'll get a collective response. Yeah.
In keeping with this gentleman's comment, if the property that's owned by the municipality now, if this was to move forward, could that property be turned over to green space or recreational space and not be sold off, but used in that regard to make it more green?
Yeah, we'll record that comment.
Yeah, absolutely, and so I know that there was some discussion when some of those parcels of property were purchased on the eastern end of the property, some of the ones that are kind of triangle shaped. Some of the comments at that time, it's a beautiful part of the lake, and wouldn't it be great to have a little, a picnic area or a canoe club or for different recreation purposes, or just kept in its natural state. So I think at this point in time, that is the intent for the municipality to keep those. They could be green spaces, as you say, they could be developed for recreation purpose. So I think there's lots of options there. Like I say, we haven't received any direction that council is interested in selling those lots at all, and in fact, a couple of them were just purchased not long ago. So so we'll definitely record those comments as well.
I think it's worth recording the input on concern over the quality of the lake, regardless of whether or not you're in the village or a landowner. Like why,
And there's obviously a special lake is unique for lots of reasons, but we're also concerned about all of our lakes in the municipality. So that in terms of the lakefront overlay and, and trying to get that education out there around what you should do with your properties that, close to the lake. Those are all important things for all of our lakes in the municipality.
I think the landowners are the ones that do not want to pollute the lake in any way, because we own land right beside it. Why would we want to pollute it? That would just be shooting yourself in the foot, right?
Is it possible, I just don't know about planning, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. Is it possible to show landowners what, and not looking at other watersheds in Lunenburg, but are there other examples, world-class examples from other jurisdictions like Europe, where they have much different planning rules, where things like this have faced municipalities and counties, and they've come up with solutions and created spaces where people get to build and develop homes and maybe there's community trails that are serviced, world-class examples that could help us who don't know about this stuff, other than being landowners, lucky enough to have land there, to get some of the creative thinking going.
So the direction was to look within Nova Scotia, so that was where we looked so far at other surface watersheds. And the determination was really that in some ways, Chester was ahead of its time in putting the zoning in place because it hadn't ever been proved to be a water source, or a good water source. It was just thought of that it could be a water source. And it's created the impression that it is a water source.
I'm not fixated on
I'm not saying that either,
water.
but I'm just trying to explain. So the direction from council was really to look at other surface water sources in Nova Scotia and how those are zoned or not zoned and how the regulations work in that sense. What you're talking about is, the other thing I think that's important to keep in mind is, in my mind as the planner who's somewhat responsible for the zoning and planning policy that goes in place, well, Spectacle Lake by the folks that I look to, which is our public works, while they deemed it a water source, I felt it made sense to keep the protections in place. But as soon as they are saying that it was not a viable source, it's only fair to the property owners that we not overly burden them with restrictions that we can't justify.
I was there with Eric Wells at the time when that meeting was done. And everyone in that room basically agreed that there was no need for the protection that was put there. But the council went ahead and did what they did. That's what's interesting today.
So, yeah, and I'm trying to speak to what, so I guess what I say is it wasn't really within the scope to go look for a world-class mixed example, because we're treating these lots like everybody else in the municipality. Like Chad said, like, there hasn't been a discussion yet about what to do with those municipal parcels, so that probably, there's good potential there for that. We have a GEM properties program where there's
Open space plan.
Open space plan place, where there's, and that's run through the rec department, where they identify municipal lands and, what would this site offer in terms of recreational opportunities that this one wouldn't, and trying to, so I think there's some potential going forward there to do those kind of things. But I guess the larger putting something in place to encompass all the private lands too, that isn't something we've considered so far. Also, not to pat myself on the back, but this Lakeside Zone won an award in Atlantic Canada for planning, for being a creative and sort of new use kind of zone. So I'm not saying we're world class.
And that already exists, like
That's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
putting this in
Yeah,
place.
that's what we're talking
So it
about.
doesn't exist there yet, it's only on Sherbrooke Lake.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did your horn there. Because I don't think we should be looking to do what the rest of Nova Scotia is doing. I think Chester, relative to other municipalities, is a capable, well-resourced, well-connected municipality that can do something far better and grander than the other municipalities. With what I see this as an opportunity, and that will enrich all the landowners. But the landowners can't come up with the ideas. We need award-winning ideas that will ultimately add value. And and I am glad you shared that it's an award-winning thing. Congrats.
If you wanted to be involved in that, like who on the recreational committee could you get in contact with?
That's so within our community development departments, community development and recreation park services, and that falls under my department.
Okay.
So yes, I'd be happy to have some conversations with you, and like I say, so if there was suggestions come forward that we look at some of our municipal properties for recreation and parks purposes that are around the lake. There's definitely some high potential there. There's also challenges that come with that as well. So we know that Garth mentioned earlier that there are no public roads into the lake, and so even those parcels of road, parcels of property that the municipality owns, there's no public road access to get into them. So there's a few little challenges like that.
Where are your right of ways, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't, yeah, so I don't know in detail just off the top, but I think some of the ones on the eastern end of this triangle parcel that I was mentioning, I think would come in off of Duncan Road.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And this one, I'm not sure exactly where those are, and then, yeah, I'm not sure where the easements are to get into the ones on the southern end here, but, yeah, so that is challenge for sure, but if there's if there's interest in some recreation things happening, so we know that like in our open space plan, so for example in the Hahn property, some of you may know that we just recently built some trails on that property, and we're getting huge amounts of folks going out and enjoying that, and lots of really positive comments coming through on what we did there. So could something like that be done on some of these properties? Potentially, yeah, so yeah, so we did.
And I think it's a good case, I think a little bit more, I think it's a good case to put that forward as to that is why, one of the things that makes these properties a bit more unique, to your point, that it has been protected from virtually all development for a number of years, and maybe there's some opportunity, like the dark sky thing that you mentioned is something, I don't know if that's ever come up in rec, but that may, so there may be some synergy there between.
Well, isn't there right away from Chester Dam?
I think perhaps, but I didn't want to say that because I don't know for sure.
Right away from Chester Dam, it don't go straight to the lake, it's on the old road.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. So we'd have to look into our deeds and
You
see.
look it up, you'll see, it's like member.
Yeah.
There's a right away from Chester Dam.
Yeah.
It don't go right to the lake, it goes on the old road, it's going to the lake.
Yeah, thank you.
Duncan Road goes on.
It's the Hayden Road.
Huh?
And it's the Hayden Road. The Hayden Road was over to War Farm Road. That used to be called the Old Stagecoach Road.
Yes.
But there was an Old Stagecoach Road.
Yeah. Lots of history around that.
So yeah, we'll definitely pass, even though it's not like exactly related to this rezoning project, we'll definitely pass those comments on.
Absolutely.
Chad, obviously, as Director of Recreation, has got them, but we'll pass those on to council as well, and they'll probably hear it through the discussion as this goes forward, but yeah, those are great suggestions.
Any other comments? If not, we just again want to thank everybody for coming out. We really appreciate you taking the time to come up this evening. And like I say, we will make sure that the recording of tonight gets uploaded to YouTube and will be available. And again, if you think of anything that comments that you want to make that you think of afterwards or that you didn't share tonight, definitely get in contact with us, and we'd love to have further conversations with you.
Do you have any idea when the next meeting on this is gonna be, or the council meeting? Is
It
it?
should be next Thursday, the 21st.
Okay,
Yeah,
right on.
it's at 6, well, sometime after 6 o'clock in the year, yeah.
And then from that point, council would set a public hearing date, and so we don't know that yet. That would be
Okay.
set up.
The public hearing, which is where they'll make the final decision, that would be at least 2 weeks from the council meeting, probably 3 weeks, and that'll be broadly advertised again, so that'll be, yeah.
okay.
Likely in December at some point. Well, thank you all for coming, this was
Thank you.
great.